we've got two amazing guests that'll be joining us, and we're going to have a conversation about what's going on in their life and with them and all along those lines. So definitely it's always great to be here at the Hayti Heritage Center, which has got amazing events going on a regular basis and all along those lines. So I've got some amazing folks, including one that knows this building quite well. So I'm going to bring him in first, but I'm going to bring in some other folks as well. So I've got at least one of the guests, but I'm going to bring in Mr. Curry, who I know knows this building quite well and all along those lines, because he has definitely done some events here and had some fun times here at the Hayti Heritage Center and all along those lines, including having the symphony perform recently and all along those lines. So how are you doing, Mr. Curry? Any big plans for Thanksgiving and all along those lines? Because I know tomorrow I'll probably be heading up to Mom's house and getting some of that good turkey dinner.
I have two good friends. They've been married for many years. The wife is my oldest female friend. By oldest, I don't mean oldest. I mean the longest experience knowing her as a friend, because we were both viola players in the Pittsburgh Youth Symphony when we were 15 and 16. And her husband used to play in the North Carolina Symphony. She still plays in the North Carolina Symphony. And he's a magnificent composer, Terry Mazesco, whose works we have done at Hayti last spring. There was a horn concerto. Magnificent.
Oh, speaking of last spring, or actually your recent concert, you had a family of a conductor that came down, and that was just an amazing experience because they really seemed to be impressed that you were doing the work of their family member. So, if you want to share a little bit about what that show was and how the show was done, because I do remember, I think they even gave you the baton of one of the conductor's baton of one of the people that had been involved and whose work you were doing, and of course, you had those amazing performers as well.
Well, Morton Gould was during his era, let's say 1940 to 1980, was one of the most famous American composers. He was very much like Leonard Bernstein. He did symphonies, Broadway, Hollywood, concertos, was a lecturer, was an administrator, and he's very hard to categorize. We like to pigeonhole people in neat little boxes, but Bernstein and Gould are from pop, spirituals, jazz, gospel, even rap at the end of his life, Morton Gould. And he wrote a piece called American Salute in 1944 at the height of World War II, based on the song When Johnny Comes Marching Home. That piece became the most often performed piece by an American composer for the next 30 years. Wow. American Salute by Morton Gould. I played it from the 7th grade onwards. And so I met him when he was one of the judges for the Stokowski conducting competition in New York City, something I won unanimously. And I've been championing his music for all these decades. A magnificent composer that should not be lost to history. He finally was honored with the Pulitzer Prize a few years before he died. So fast forward to just this past June, where a friend of mine invited me to a synagogue where a gentleman was talking about the synthesis between African-American music and Jewish folk music. So I can self-identify as Jewish. My Jewish friends tell me, because my great-grandmother on my mother's side was Jewish, and I'm mostly black. Anyway, I went to this wonderful lecture, and I met a gentleman that said he was married to the daughter of the Morton Gould. Well, I got really excited because Morton Gould had his finger in every pie. I mean, he knew everyone: Jerome Robbins, Leonard Bernstein, the cream of the crop during his era. So we finally got together, and I knew that Morton Gould had written a piece for Bill Clinton to play on his tenor sax. Now, those of us of a certain generation remember when Bill Clinton was merely the governor of Arkansas, he went on the Arsenio Hall show with his tenor sax and jammed with the band in the opening segment. So he had on these badass sunglasses, and all of a sudden, after George Herbert Walker Bush, he seemed to be the new generation guy, hip, not so stiff. And that was an iconic moment, him playing saxophone. So eventually when Clinton became president, Morton Gould was honored with one of those great Kennedy Center honors. And so as a gesture to Bill Clinton for this honor, Morton Gould wrote him a piece. And so that piece, we have a picture of Morton Gould handing President Bill Clinton this piece for saxophone. But from that point on, it was lost to history. So I asked his daughter about it. I used to play baritone sax. And she said, well, we think that Bill Clinton is the only person that has the copy. So that means it's gone. But I'm persistent. I'm very persistent. So I went to the Library of Congress and got a hold of the Gould collection. And lo and behold, there it was, miscatalogued somewhere in a pile of other things. And so I was wildly excited about this, but you have to get permission from the Library of Congress to use this. This is a very serious thing. This is for research purposes only. So the gentleman there knew Abby Gould Burton, the daughter, and he said, yes, you can use it and you can perform it and you can record it, which is like all kinds of legalese that he cut the red tape of. So I looked at this piece and it was in two versions. One was for solo tenor sax. The other had optional accompaniment, very light stuff like a strumming sound, and in the dance part of the song and dance, hand claps, rhythmic hand claps. So I was wildly excited about this. I still am, because this last piece of Morton Gould, a Pulitzer Prize-winning American composer, to come to light. I got Greg Gelb, one of the great sax players in America, to play the solo part, and the daughter came. She brought her family. Now, just by coincidence, of course, we tried to get in touch with Bill Clinton, with the Arkansas place and something else place, Crickets, of course. And then just when we were performing it that week, he was in Durham. And then on Sunday afternoon, just as we were playing this piece in his honor, he was in Raleigh.
Wow.
So look, we're still trying to get a hold of him because it's a really cute piece. And I just talked to Debbie 2 days ago. We'd like to get it out in the world, published by Schirmer. And it's a very cool piece. I mean, I'm very proud of my orchestration of it.
Yeah, and a lot of people are definitely, I know a lot of people, because we had a lecture here of students from, I believe they were the High Point area and all along those lines, but some of them were disappointed that Kamala didn't win. And I know that Bill had been here to endorse Kamala's run, and now we've got the second Trump administration and all along those lines. So it ought to be interesting how arts are supported, or what goes on in the arts world in this new age that we're about to enter in 2024. So I just wanted your take on what we can expect for art support, because I know that definitely the ARPA grants, because we're one of the administrators of the ARPA grants, American Rescue Plan Act and everything, and there are a lot of other people that are concerned about the future of the arts, of all arts. So I just wanted your take on the future of the arts in this modern day era.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I just reached the age of 70. So in short, I've seen a lot of stuff in my lifetime. I've seen cycles where the arts seem to be, Reagan tried to abolish the National Endowment of the Arts.
Right.
It was Nixon that created it, another Republican president. So, and it was Senator Jesse Helms, who was a senior senator from this state, North Carolina, that got all involved in the famous or infamous Robert Mapplethorpe photographs. And Congress got involved. They started stripping money from the arts. And then that money came back eventually. So look, I found a quote today from Leos Janáček, a great Czech composer. He said, in tough times, this is when the artists get moving. During the Great Depression, there were great composers and great playwrights. The beginning of Tennessee Williams, Clifford Odets, William Inge, Eugene O'Neill. And at this time in the 30s, when America was having a much more severe breakdown than we're having now, the Great Depression, what percentage of Americans are out of work? Unbelievable. Right. People were looking for something different than democracy. And this is where the American Communist Party becomes really popular. And some of the lefty liberal types, like Aaron Copland and Leonard Bernstein, were involved in this. But mind you, I have to say very quickly, the American Communist Party was in no way related to the Stalinist Party.
Right.
It didn't have any of that draconian dictatorship model. It was just trying to even out things so that the 1% don't have all the money and the rest of us are trying to make bills. So this was a thoughtful era, and lots came from that. And look, I'm in my middle teens, the late 1960s. Another nervous breakdown period. 68, Martin Luther King assassinated, Robert Kennedy assassinated. Nixon, who later becomes a criminal, becomes president. George Wallace, the segregationist candidate, does well in the North, and an illegal war in Vietnam and race rights. How about some more? So that was a terrible period. And you remember maybe perhaps the flower children and people dropping out, the hippies, and the poets are writing the songs. So it was a great flowering of thoughtfulness. And I really want to see not only my generation wake up, but I want to see these young kids hitting the streets like they did in the 60s. Because if we want to have something done, as Martin Luther King said, we just can't just expect people to give us our freedom. It's not going to happen. We have to demand it.
Yeah, we definitely have to demand it. I'm bringing our other guest as well because she's actually gone up against a major institution. She actually was very involved in the church community and all along those lines, but is now doing a lot of work. So definitely, if you'll just share a little bit about your own story, Michaelia, and where you're at and everything, because I know when I saw you on podcast guest, I was very fascinated by what you had gone through, even in a major institution, and now you're kind of like looking at a different way of healing and everything. And healing is important, even the way that music heals us. So if you'll just share a little bit about your story as well.
Hi, thank you. Sure. So yeah, I'm a licensed therapist, and I was raised in a very conservative Christian culture growing up. I was homeschooled. I actually lost my faith right before going to college, but my college was a pretty strict Christian university and whatnot. And at the time, I'm still working as a therapist, trying to help people heal from trauma, from eating disorders, from a variety of things. But I'm also now offering coaching to support those who are struggling with dogmatic religion, with, kind of some of the cult-like religion that, is growing in America, with a lot of the, kind of like worship of Trump. So more people are kind of falling away from religion, and I'm seeking to offer a place of support to heal from religious trauma while still, holding on to spirituality, not throwing out the baby with the bathwater kind of a thing. So that's kind of the work that I'm doing.
Along those same lines and everything, on this show and on this network, we've been talking a lot the last couple of days about the obesity epidemic. I know that there was an epidemic earlier, and I know I need to lose a couple of pounds and everything along those lines, eating way too much fast food, eating way too much DoorDash and all along those lines. But I just wonder, because I heard that they say that 50%, I think the U.S. Surgeon General says 50% of the population could be eligible for Ozempic, which we know is a weight loss drug. And then I've heard as much as 75% of the United States population, I'm not sure about the world population, is overweight because we have all this great food. And all along those lines, like I said, I know what I'm guilty of, not exercising and spending way too much time at the fast food restaurants and on DoorDash and everything like that. So I just wanted your take on that as a person that's in that weight loss and kind of getting people in a better lifestyle.
So, my work is mainly with disordered eating, and, sometimes that does lead to overeating as well. And the way I see the obesity epidemic in our country is rooted in, our lack of time to prepare healthy meals, lack of resources to prepare healthy meals, and our lack of awareness around the importance of processing our feelings. A lot of people turn to food for comfort or even to numb feelings that they don't even realize they're avoiding. And so that also contributes to the culture of, fast food, easy, rich in fat and salt and sugar and all that kind of foods that is contributing to, the weight challenges in our country as well.
Yeah. Along those same lines, definitely Maestro Curry and everything. One of the things that people use to alleviate the pain of what's going on, and you kind of mentioned it with the young people, is music and the support of music. I know that one of your musicians, I'm actually a little bit jealous of him, and maybe you are as well, because he got to play with Stevie Wonder not that long ago, that being Mr. Prescott and all along those lines. So he and I believe it was Timothy Holly. So both of them got to play with a iconic performer that I've always had a great deal of admiration for. But I was just wondering your take on the importance of music to our well-being and to our health.
Well, number one, even though I'm a professional musician, my first love will always remain books and reading. I am lucky to be curious. not about a lot. I'm one of these people that know a lot about a little, as opposed to whatever the opposite is. So for me, it's been a healing thing, to be sure. With books, it takes me away from the world. It takes me away from reality. That was true in my grade school where I needed to escape. But music forces me to get in touch with my feelings, which is good. It can purge things. And Michaela, I do have a question for you, maybe starting off with a comment. I was just mentioning to Mark that in the late 1960s, there was a rebirth of interest in spiritual ideas, religion, and off the beaten path religion, not as you called it, the dogmatic religion. It's bothered me very much so when people will cherry pick through the Bible and say this is nonsense, and then when they want to prosecute me, they'll say no, that's you entirely. So my spirituality is related in a sense to what Friedrich Nietzsche said in his novel Thus Spake Zarathustra. Everyone remembers the quote, God is dead. Mm-hmm. But that's taken out of context. What he meant was, in the future, people will abandon the various dogmatic organized religions and create their own from within. Mm-hmm. That's risky business because you actually have to think and you have to look at all the options. But through an epiphany and through various experiences, my God is always looking at me, and as God keeps me honest. So, as I say, in the late 60s, when we were having a total nervous breakdown, I mean, much worse than now. I mean, as some of our older people say, conservatives and liberals like George Will and Doris Kearns Goodwin, hey, grow up, young people. We've been through worse. We have been through worse. But I am missing in this era, number one, the kids getting into the streets and creating civil disobedience, because that's the next step. Another thing is I'm nothing without my belief in God. And I'm sorry for people that don't have something, but I do know why you're saying people have rejected that dogmatic, what the Bible is inerrant, infallible. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And that's actually how I was raised to view spirituality, was through the lens of religion and through the lens of what the Bible had to say about what was true and what was not true. I was taught that the Bible was the infallible word of God. And I got to the point where it didn't add up. And it was a huge disruptor of my life. My whole worldview fell apart. And for me personally, I took that as I cannot trust spiritual things because it can't be proven. And I just threw it all out of my life for 10 years. I didn't say I knew there was no God or any kind of spiritual reality, but I said, I don't know, and I don't want to get hurt by trying to know. And so I'm just leaving it all alone. But I actually had my own, kind of spiritual awakening after 10 years of agnosticism. And so that's why I'm trying to support those who are in that process of deconstruction. So what I'm seeing is that there are many, many people leaving religion, but there's also many people finding spirituality outside of religion. However, those who started with religion, I'm noticing many struggle with that agnosticism or atheism because of the pain from religion, which is where I'm seeking to step in to support people in healing so that, again, they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater like I did for 10 years. But it's true. That's a huge barrier. There are so many people who are cherry picking from the Bible and using that information to try to dictate what should happen in our country. And, using some to support themselves and using the same book to not support other ideas, which are actually also supported in the Bible, such as, taking care of the poor and loving your neighbor and all these other different things. So people are noticing the hypocrisy, and, statistics show that people are leaving church more than ever before. We actually have, I think the prediction is that by 2050, there will be less people who identify as Christian than who do identify as Christian in our country, in the United States. And currently, there are more people who do not identify with any kind of spiritual, like church or synagogue or temple, than those who do, subscribe to a membership to some kind of church or religious institution. So things are definitely changing, but we are experiencing a different version of a spiritual revival, I would say. I wasn't around in like the 60s and 70s, but I have done some research. Actually, there's a really good docuseries. I think it was on Apple TV called, I think it was 1971, the year that music changed everything, something along those lines. And that, I thought of that with what you were sharing, because you're right. There was so much that happened around that time that was so difficult and huge and all of those things. For me, I was in college the first time that Trump was elected, and I can't even remember at the moment everything else going on at that time, but it felt like, oh my gosh, this is so terrible. We are dealing with so much. And then I watched that documentary and I was like, this is nothing new. Like, terrible stuff has been happening, like I can't imagine going through that time as well. So, there is a need for spirituality to help us stay grounded, help us stay united, help us to have more hope, because there is a rise in cynicism at the time as well, unfortunately, and spirituality can really help us go against that.
Yeah, along those same lines and everything, Michaela, and I'd love to hear your thoughts around this, Maestro Curry as well. One of the things that I know that has gone on for a while, and I think I mentioned the last time you were on, Maestro Curry, was that there was a documentary, I think either Peter Jennings or Dan Rathers or one of those famous news anchors did it, and it talks about the commonality of religion and everything. So I do agree there are a lot of people that are going away from religion, but if you think about the Eastern religions, and we had a Buddhist minister here at Haiti not that long ago, or you think about the various religions, I would say that the principles are the same. Now, where I have problems is those that are dogmatic and think it's their way or the highway, if I can use that old adage and everything. But the principles of respecting nature, respecting your parents, respecting others around you and everything, I would say are very common principles across the religious landscape. And I've been trying to say that on this show as well as others for a while, and haven't got much pushback on that, because I think most people agree that there are extremes in every religion, just like in every society. But the core, that center group, really wants a like-minded attitude. So I just wondering, as one that has been involved in religious, Michaela, and everything, and also one that has studied religion, is that something that you think that there is more commonality between, say, somebody of Islamic beliefs and somebody of Jewish beliefs and somebody of Christian beliefs than this separation that society tries to push toward us?
I would say it unfortunately, honestly, depends on the perspective, because, with how, so I was, like I said, raised, within Christianity, but a more like legalistic version of it. I was homeschooled, but I went to these like outside classes where we were literally, trained to be, good Christians who believed the Bible was the word of God. And we were actually taught to see the fallacy in the idea of coexisting. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the bumper sticker, coexist, with all the different religious symbols to make the word coexist. I was taught that that's bogus, because we can't coexist, because, the book of Islam is saying to kill those who aren't, and Christianity is saying that those will go to hell that aren't. And so, depending on how we look at it, unfortunately, religion can be used to divide. And we've seen that throughout history, which is why personally, like, I love and accept the culture of religion. If people want to hold on to that, I totally embrace that. But holding on to religion as the truth, I see the damage. We've seen it throughout history. However, you're absolutely right that at the foundation, it's all the same. That the golden rule of, love your neighbor as yourself, that is found everywhere in every religion, even in not necessarily religions, but like cultural spiritualities of native tribes and different things like that. There is so much that can unite us if we allow it to. And if we just step away from this idea of black and white, right and wrong, and staying just so rigid with what our text has to say about a certain subject.
That makes a lot of sense. I love you. Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Well said. And Mark, I remember that series you're referring to. It was on PBS, hosted by William Moyers, and Joseph Campbell was the expert on these various philosophies and religions. This hit me in my mid-20s, and I think that a lot of young men of some kind of achievement feel they own the world between the ages of 21 and 25. And then they realize at 25, you know what, I don't really know anything. And then I'm in my library now. The shelves are still groaning with the philosophy, every major religion, blah, 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 blah. And like, what's my life about? All those questions that don't seem silly to me now, but you're not going to put those questions to rest unless you've grappled with them for a few years in your life or certain people. So I'm on this quest. And finally, I read something that I recall was by Descartes, who said, you can't prove that I'm holding up this pill bottle. You can't prove that. And guess what? That caused me to lose my mind. I said, there is no answer. And then I lost a whole decade. I call it my John Belushi decade. The only thing that you're supposed to do in life is party on down and have a great time. So when I mentor these young men, first thing I do is I'd say, what's your Achilles heel? And let me help you get through that terrible time for me and for many others between 25 and 30. Because you have to have, frankly, I think there's a lot of people now. Who was it? There was a great Nixon colleague who's now not a Republican. That in the Bible, it says it's one thing to be wrong, but the deceivers are far worse. Anyone can be wrong, but to lie to someone to get something you want. And we're seeing so much of this, maybe because we have more of it on TV now. But I don't know how these people live with themselves, because I know God is watching me right now, especially when I'm mentoring young people. And I would fall down and faint if I were to lie. How do we grapple with this? People are just lying, and it's the new norm.
Yeah, it is a new norm, but along those same lines, and I gonna just kind of like, because I know a little bit of the background because it was part of the research and everything, but there's this new norm of even creating your own narrative. And one of the things that I studying you, Michaela, and everything was that your dad was very religious, but at one point he also became, if I can use this term, a conspiracy theorist. And I don't know which conspiracy he had and everything along those lines, but I just wondered your take on how that happens and all along those lines. And just in general, if that is a situation where you have that notion of you waiting to explore new kinds of options in life, because I know a lot of people, even during the pandemic, they became concerned about the number of drugs that are out there and the number of things that were being introduced. And there was even one of our guests on this network, and everything was something that I've had a hard time believing, but we did talk to him, and he gave a good case for flat Earth, because we had a flat earther on about a month ago. And like I said, best I can tell, the world is round and will stay round and everything. But he actually made some legitimate cases around flat Earth and legitimate cases around the moon landing not taking place. But I just wondering your thoughts around that as one that had a family member that went down that path.
Yeah, and I think it also still ties in with the idea of religion as well, because, for me, something that was so that had such a grasp on me within religion was this idea that it was the truth. We have the truth, truth is so important. It's a, huge value. It used to be my highest value. It's crazy for me to think of now, because now I see truth very differently. Because, we live in a time that is both, wonderful and extremely difficult with this, advantage of the internet. We have access to so much more information than we ever had before, with so much more ease and so many different opinions, and people have a platform to share their opinion. And, when it comes to, conspiracy theories, conspiracy theorists, it's a really challenging topic, because I firmly believe, and I realized this early on, that, people aren't crazy for what they believe. People believe what they believe based on what they've been presented. And there's also the element of what they're willing to accept, look further into, and all of that. But if you let yourself, like you mentioned when that person came on here, they had some good points. And if that's all you're being fed or all you're being exposed to or all you're seeing, it's going to make perfect sense to believe A, and it could make perfect sense to believe B if you had a different set of information that you were focusing on. So, the internet is a fantastic tool, but it can also be really dangerous because people can, show put all these puzzle pieces and make it look like it fits together perfectly, but it doesn't mean that it's true. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. So it's really a big challenge that we face with our access to information.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Hey, Maestro Kerry, I'd love to hear your thoughts around that as well. But one of the other things that I said I was going to mention to you is something that I am quite proud of. It's part of what I do here when I'm at HATI is being the not just working the staff, but also being one of the historians along with Aya and others here as well. So definitely it was a very vital Black Wall Street here, and we talk about that. We also talk about the connection of the Black Wall Street leaders to Duke University and to the Duke kind of leaders in terms of corporate America and everything like that, and the creators of Duke University and everything. But even in my own life, my grandmother, as I told you the last time you were on, was the creator of the African American Library in Raleigh, North Carolina, our state capital, and everything. And definitely that family legacy is something that is important to me, but not just to me, but others as well. I even think about people that were not related to me that I have a great deal of respect for, like Baba Chuck Davis and definitely Theo Freelon and a number of others that have gone on into the ancestor ground. So I was just wondering, in your own life, how has, and then I definitely want to hear from Ms. Castro as well, but how has that importance of legacy been to you? Because to me, that's something that is vital, and I don't know that our kids do enough of that. Because even when we had the high school kids come here last Friday, so a week ago today and everything, a lot of them were going into interesting fields like architecture and medicine, but some of them didn't understand the history of things that have been created even in the African American community. So we were informing them about things like the traffic light and the GPS and blood plasma and a number of other things. So I just wanted your take on the importance of legacy, even in your own life.
Well, the great American author Gore Vidal. Do I hear myself on an echo?
No, there's like a bell, but you're good.
Okay. Gore Vidal called this country the United States of Amnesia. And we do tend to forget generation. I'm surprised at my feelings when I had to live through the David Duke, President David Duke on the Republican Party ticket, ran for governor of Louisiana. He had been a member of the American Nazi Party, and yet he got 65% of the white vote. So during those weeks, I'm looking at everyone white, saying to myself, are you one of them? Are you one of them? And the same thing will be happening more than ever at the Thanksgiving dinner table. We know we cannot bring up the subject of food because these days a parent cares so much if a child cares outside the race. But if they carry outside the political party, they're fighting words. So we've seen this before, but this is a heightened atmosphere. I don't know that Martin Luther King is understood. I don't know that why I seem to be the only black person that's obsessed with Abraham Lincoln. I think it's a no-brainer today. There's 40 books about Abraham Lincoln. The person that's played my mother was born 50 years after the end of slavery. The father was born 50 years after the end of the Emancipation Proclamation. Unless you understand that and the messed up misconception and the fact that I saw some of the white kingdoms when I was 10 in Virginia in the museum were working. So if we don't have black or whites, then we don't have an awful demonic period in American history. Unless you understand that when the slaves got free, this was all peace and joy and trust. Unless you understand why the conservative were, then what can we do? I'm afraid about the idea of integration in this era.
Wow. Hey, along those same lines, Ms. Castro, I know that part of your family is of Italian heritage, and I know that some of that is has its own stereotypes, whether that's the mafia stereotype or whether it's some of the other stereotypes that exist and everything. So I just wanted your take on legacy as well, because I think legacy is very important and it's across cultural boundaries. It can be African American culture, can be things like Italian or German or others. But I just wondered how important was that Italian heritage in your own life, as well as the religious heritage that you talked about as well.
Yeah, I was lucky because I actually hear some echoes. I don't know what's happening earlier on my end.
Maybe we should.
I can still hear y'all. Yeah, if y'all want to leave and come back, we can see if that works.
Okay, I'll get it.
Okay, let's try that. Let's try it.
All right, let's do that. So we will continue the conversation going on in legacy and all along those lines, but definitely it's been a fascinating conversation so far. We'll see if we can get them to come back, and hopefully it'll be a clearer picture and all along those lines, but definitely we'll see. Yeah, Maestro Curry is back, so I'll try to bring him back on first, and we'll see if the lady gets to join us shortly as well. So definitely that sounds a little clearer and everything, so we'll see what goes on, and hopefully she'll join us back as well. But yeah, that's the whole notion of legacy is important. And while we're waiting for Miss Castro to come back and everything, how important do you think legacy is even in the musical journey? Because you talked about some of the great conductors and great composers, and whenever I think of music, I think about those that we know and revere, whether that's in jazz like the John Coltrane's and the Thelonious Monks, or whether that's folks in classical like Leonard Bernstein that you mentioned and others. But how important do you think it is for legacy in the sense of the creative world and music?
It's very important to know whose shoulders you're standing on. Do you hear my echo?
I do hear a little bit of an echo, so it could be on my end. Let's see if I can get my Miss Michaela, but we can just work through it. Otherwise, we might have to do a later recording later, but we'll try to work through it for now and everything. But just share a little bit about your thoughts about legacy and all along those lines.
I find there are two types of people that are performers. Those that are doing it for ego gratification, and those that are greatly how much they love the art form they've given their life. The greatest composition of the 20th century, Nadia Boulanger, wouldn't accept someone, no matter how smart they are, unless they were a fool for music. So I've been a fool for music since 8th grade. And yes, I've investigated the greatest artists, conductors, jazz. That to me is lit. That kind of research is not homework. But for most people, now I'm talking about 99% of the young conductors, it's a vanity thing. It's an ego thing. So they are interested in who's making about today. And how these people are making today. They're not interested in Toscanini or Beethoven.
Yep, definitely. Just really quickly, I'm gonna try an experiment. I might even text myself out and let y'all talk for a while I try to see what's going on here and everything. But what is your take on legacy as well, Ms. Castro? Because I mentioned your Italian background, and I also know you've got some Catholic background as well and everything, or some of those kind. Well, actually, I guess it was another one of the church groups. I forgot which one it was and everything. But just share a little bit about your own thoughts around legacy and heritage.
Yeah, so my dad is straight from Sicily. And so, there is that close, definitely from him, there is that close connection to the Italian culture. And I've been very grateful to have the exposure I've had to my Italian culture, and definitely want to continue to pass that down. So I definitely see the benefits in culture in that sense of, or in the legacy of culture is what, because we're talking about legacy here. The different ways that people have traditions, the stories that they tell, the foods that they make. I think in that sense, legacy is important, but also in what you were speaking to, Mr. Curry, with, knowing what happened in history, and that type of legacy is extremely valuable. I've been very, fortunate to be to witness some really amazing exhibits about things that have occurred in history, to kind of create more depth of my knowledge of what's happened and whatnot, and increase my awareness. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that teaching the history of slavery was something that wasn't taught
Mhm.
in my high school. When
Mhm.
Roots came on TV, I think in 73, Black people, all people were shocked. Oh, that's the way it was. So
Wow.
it's a very uncomfortable conversation. And I think for me, it boils down to this. It's easy to look at white people and say this, not that I think this, but it's easy to say, hey, y'all was behind slavery and y'all was behind the Holocaust. There must be something inherently wrong, demonic with white people because y'all been involved in that. Now, look at the amount of Black people in jail. Look at the amount of Black people that are struggling still to get to the upper middle class, let alone the middle class. It's easy to say, as they did in the day, their brains are smaller, or they should pick themselves up by their bootstraps and not look for a handout. I mean, that really is out there. That whole curse of, for instance, me got where I was because they had to hire a Black guy. So if a young person is growing up and they've already seen a Black president, what does that white person or Black person think of prejudice? If a gay person is growing up and they've already known gay marriage since they were 12, what are they going to know about the history and the stuff that's happening right now that is unfortunate against gays and the LGBTQ thing?
Yeah. That's why history is so important.
Yeah, history is definitely very important in that sense. Everything. Just really quickly along those same lines, and this is for both of you, because one of the things that I talk about on this show quite often, and I know you know this because you were on the show before, Maestro Carey, is how do you deal with that imposter syndrome? Because I'm sure that even when you wrote your book and got your works out there were probably people, including those in your family, that told you that you didn't need to do this, Ms. Castro, and everything. And I'm sure the same thing with you, Maestro Carey, that there were probably folks in your own environment that were telling you that it wouldn't work and everything like that. So I know that that outer voice can be very problematic, but also that inner voice, because even in my own life, I know that I have avoided relationship opportunities and job opportunities because I was having too much of a conversation with myself. And by the time I got the nerve or the courage to go for the job or the young lady and everything, they had skipped on to something else and everything along those lines. So how do you deal, both of you, with that whole notion of the inner voice as well as those outer voices, because they can be very problematic?
Well, if I can start, if I may.
Yes.
I
And
think
real quick, Mark, if you probably wouldn't echo.
Cool.
Oh,
okay. So I think if you disappear, leave us alone, as it were, then there's no echo. Let's try this. I no longer hear the echo. Can you both hear me?
I hear you.
Okay. Well, I'm reading a book now about Ralph Ellison. No, I've never read The Invisible Man. I'm creeping on it by reading about him first. And there was something that really shook me. I grew up, my era, every Black parent and every Black member of the family and the so-called aunts and uncles that weren't related to, they told me and my little brother, you're going to have to be twice as good as the white person. Now, that's a double-edged sword. But you say, okay, that's reality. I'm going to have to be twice as good. And then the other part of the sword is, excuse me, why do I have to be twice as good? I mean, what the hell is going on here? I resent that. But it does make you rise. But at the same time, it may be my condition of being a perfectionist, as was Ralph Ellison, who struggled for 40 years to write his second book. Part of the perfectionism may be love of the craft, the self-reward, and some of it may be just insecurity. As a psychiatrist told one of my friends about me, he's just really, really insecure. That's why he has to go through 49 drafts to make something right. So I'll never know the truth about that. But I knew that I was going to be ignored entirely unless I was at least twice as good. Every immigrant that came to this country, including your parents or grandparents, Michaela, they always caught holy hell, the first two generations. But your generations, they were never property that you could buy like a book or a pig. And from that, we have the essential dilemma of the dark America that is yet to transcend that.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, when it comes to the topics of like imposter syndrome and all of that, so I have two opinions on that. So for one, there's a great writer and researcher, Brene Brown, who talks about imposter syndrome. And what she says is that if you don't have imposter syndrome, that's the problem. Because anytime you're doing something new, of course you're going to have imposter syndrome. You're going to feel like this is, what am I doing? Well, you're doing it for the first time. So there's not that comfort built up yet. But as you keep going, you build the comfort, you build the trust in yourself. But ultimately, and here's the other piece, how I overcome imposter syndrome is knowing that, it's a service. Put yourself out there is a service. And if you stay hidden out of fear of people's judgments or opinions, we're not going to have as much information. If everyone did that, where would we be? We have to help each other along in this life. And if we resist that out of fear of opinions, then we're doing a disservice to others. So for me, and sharing my story, even though much of my community is very religious still, because that was my upbringing and that's my whole family, I pushed through because I want to help the people who went through what I did, and I want to help them learn and get through it more quickly than I did based on what I have learned from the time that's passed for me. And I just kind of normalize the experience when that imposter syndrome comes up, acknowledging it, feeling it, but moving forward anyway. Those are my opinions.
I can see that entirely. And like I say, my art form, I would be a perfectionist. What I said about the imposter syndrome. I try working.
That makes a lot of sense.
I have to have
Just really
pardon me.
quickly, and I'm gonna disappear again and everything along those lines. But just really quickly along those same lines, and then we'll disappear again so y'all can have the dialogue. But one thing you talk about, Ms. Castro, in your treatments and in your work that you do is something that I'm a big fan of and everything. So I'd love to hear from you as well as from Maestro Curry, this notion of authenticity. Because I sometimes think that people are not as authentic as they should be, but you talk about it from everything from authentic spirituality to just being authentic in your work and everything. So I'd love to hear your notion about authenticity and the importance of authenticity, and I'll bounce off and catch y'all's reply as I am listening.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Authenticity is like, I think, part of the epidemics that we're facing are because of the loss of authenticity, the lack of as much authenticity. And not that it's necessarily hugely new. I mean, with all of the control and, societal standards and religious standards and all of that, authenticity has been a challenge for a long time. But now, with social media, I mean, people can create any kind of perception of how things are for them, even if it's not the truth, and they can be living inauthentically in that way online as well. But for me, learning to be more authentic was actually for me the catalyst to my spiritual awakening after leaving religion. It wasn't planned or intentional, but without being authentic, we are losing a part of ourselves. We're not in tune with ourselves. We are just kind of like walking around trying to please other people or thinking that we're pursuing our goals, but really we're pursuing, what kind of helps us numb our negative emotions. Whereas when we're authentic, we truly know ourselves. We're truly seeking to give ourselves what we need. And it is important because when we're not authentic, there's a disrupt. There's an internal disrupt, and it can actually contribute to physical health issues, let alone mental health issues. And we're seeing epidemics of those in our country as well. Absolutely. So authenticity is absolutely extremely important. And I've seen that in my life as well as in my work with my clients.
And I'm thinking of racial authenticity. When I was born in 1954, I was a colored baby. Then 8 years later, I was Negro. If you called me colored, them's just fighting words. And then it became black. And then it became Afro-American. And then it became African-American. And then the New York Times took away my hyphen about 4 years ago. So I grew up wanting to be an intellectual. I'm a reader. And so I wasn't teased in my all black elementary school, but my brother, for whatever reason, caught holy hell. He would carry his cello to school and they say, "Go to bed, Beethoven." I don't think he's ever gotten over that trauma. So I'm afraid that black people don't remember that when Obama first appeared in the Iowa primary and none of us knew of him, there were questions. He certainly is clean and doesn't talk with the accent, and he must not be authentic. Well, when he won that primary, he was authentic enough. So I still don't know what it means, authenticity. I know it's one of the hardest things. Your parents, the first thing they teach you is not integrity or morality. They teach you not to stick out. Johnny, if you pick your nose in church, that's not good. If you wear this kind of clothes, you'll be laughed at. They teach us how to get into reality and get with the social contract. And then at what point do we expect people to think and do the Socratic dialogue internally to decide, well, what am I? Who guides people? Who the hell wants to think? Now, does it get you laid or paid or a date? It's only for certain people. I'm guessing a small percentage of people really want to think.
I think people are afraid to think as much as they are afraid to feel. Like I said earlier, we struggle so much with actually feeling our feelings. And that is part of what disconnects us from what that authenticity really is and really can look like, because we're not in tune with ourselves. So we're not thinking, we're not feeling, we are just trying to do what we're originally taught, which is, go along with the crowd. That way we don't get criticism. We, people are happy with us. We can people please, when really we're just abandoning ourselves. And that reframe of I'm abandoning myself when I am prioritizing other people over myself, when I am creating all this inner distress out of fear of making another person unhappy and prioritizing their happiness, that's abandoning myself. And what also really helped me was the visual of the inner child, this idea of inner child. We all have an inner child. I'm no longer a child, but we all have an inner child within us. And sometimes it can help when we're so trained to prioritize society's opinion over our own opinion, to think about our inner child and what are they feeling? What are they needing from you? And in turn, in taking care of them, you're taking care of yourself. And that provides the pathway of authenticity.
Hey, along those same lines and everything, I'm glad you brought up two things that I've brought up on this network regularly, and I'm glad you brought them up in this show in y'all's conversation with each other. But we've definitely talked a lot of times about people pleasers. I know I've been guilty of that, including going for and doing contracts that might not have been to my benefit because I was trying to please somebody and everything along those lines. And then I've also had this notion of the inner child. I know that I have two nephews. I don't have any kids of my own, but I have two nephews. And I remember when they were young, they're now 15 and 16, but when they were young and everything, my dad actually showed them Mother Nature and showed them a lot of other things. And I'm sure there were some people even here in Durham that probably thought that was not the norm and shouldn't be done because they hadn't had their brain developed and all along those lines. But I think that they are, even at their teen years, some of the most intelligent men that I know. And of course, I'm biased because they are part of my family line, my brother's kids and everything like that. But I just wanted your take, because I sometimes think, just as a aside, that during the pandemic, Clubhouse was very popular, and there was a gentleman that I had known before because he's a poet and everything, and he started a group called the Funky Eye Puppets that I joined and participated with, and may even get back to participating with them at some point or another. But one of the things that IPC, and that's his stage name, used to say is this notion that we have to get out of our heads and all along those lines, and to have that play. I know even in relationships, they say that play can be very much an important part of relationships. So do we have too many folks in general, in your mind, Ms. Castro, that are getting out of that notion of remembering their inner child? Because I think a lot of folks are afraid to play because they're afraid that they will look silly and everything. But I know that even in Thanksgiving and this Thanksgiving, at some point, spinners, which is like a form of dominoes, will probably come out, and my nephews and my brother and my mom and others will be playing that game probably tomorrow and everything. I just wonder, do we not do enough game playing and releasing our inner child?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there is a epidemic of what it all comes back down to, which is our worry about what society is saying, what society is going to think of us. And again, now with the internet, people can record you. People can, if you do a silly, embarrassing thing, it's not just something that people talk about and forget about when the next person does a silly thing, but it's recorded, it's on the internet, it can be shared time and time again. So there's all this fear around playing, around being authentic in that sense. But it is so important, not just in relationships, but for us as human beings, individually, and as part of nurturing our inner child, because that never ends. We might reject the side of us that seeks to play, but when we nourish that, our mental health improves, our physical health in turn improves. They're so correlated. So it is very, very important and not done enough anymore, unfortunately.
I wonder if we're going to be a different nation, a more forgiving nation, now that we've elected for president a convicted felon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Abraham Lincoln has been canceled here and there. Beethoven was canceled here and there because someone said he's an example of toxic masculinity. I'm a biography reader more than anything else. I've yet to find a perfect person in real life. Fiction, yes. But everyone, frankly, messed up really big. And you can cancel the entire works of Tchaikovsky or Liszt or Brahms if you want to. So now we've elected a felon as president, and what they like are his works. They're not so distracted by his character and his flaws. Now, maybe I'm just being ironic here or sarcastic, but still, I would like to see some kind of forgiveness going on where we can look at people waving a Confederate flag in 1953 and saying, as Jesus said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." I've been on a 40-year forgiveness tour after going to Monticello, which to me is the most beautiful place I've been to in the world. Okay. And then I said, if I were Jefferson, would I have given up Monticello? Because if I gave up my slaves, I would have to give up Monticello. So could I do that? Well, I'd say, yeah, I'm a role model. That will help if I gave up my slaves. Other people would follow my model. And then another part of me would say, you know what? People are still going to keep their slaves. I mean, it just doesn't make any difference. It's let them take that risk. I'm going to stay in Monticello with my slaves, and Sally, bring me another biscuit. He didn't know any better. Nobody knows any better. The Nazis didn't know any better. After being brainwashed with propaganda, people that believe that Trump won the election, I look at a lot of right-wing news media, and I highly recommend it if you don't do it, because that's a whole different world from the world I'm seeing over here. So are we going to be more forgiving people and stop this canceling stuff, because it was already out of hand 10 years ago?
Yeah, I can agree with that completely. We don't forgive that. Cancel culture is a problem.
Yeah, cancel culture is definitely a problem. But even what I was going to say and everything along those same lines, as you know, the Hayti Center has a couple of iconic stained glass. One of them is a smaller stained glass, but that is of Julius Carr, and it's not his actual picture and everything, but it is what he did, because he gave some money to a African-American congregation that then became the Hayti Heritage Center, but he was probably wanting separate but equal, because Julius Carr, who was the founder of Carrboro and is tied to UNC and everything like that, was a known Klansman and everything. Now, Mr. Duke, also, who I mentioned earlier, has the biggest stained glass, bigger than the two of Jesus Christ. I think they're two, if I'm remembering, without looking directly in the sanctuary and everything like that. But he's got the biggest one and the most prominent one. But he also, while he owned slaves, he was more maybe a little bit more altruistic, and part of that may be that his own personal barber was Mr. Merrick, one of the founders of Black Wall Street. So there was kind of this symbiotic relationship, because Mr. Merrick, who was the barber, was learning from Mr. Duke, who was a major robber baron of that time and everything. And my understanding is that he was a little bit more liberal, and part of that, in my mind, is that part of the downtowns, meaning downtown black black downtown and white downtown were right next to each other. So there had to be a little bit more intermingling, and there might have been some cross population as well that was going on at that time as well, because some of the affluent African Americans are somewhat related to the affluent Dukes and everything like that. So definitely just interested in how these contrasts can exist even in society. That's the long and short of why I was saying that and everything. But coming back to music, I did have a question for both of you, because I know that when I looked at your background, Ms. Castro, one of the things that you spent a lot of time was Christian books, Christian movies, and definitely even Christian music. So I was wondering, and this is for both of you, are there any particular Christian artists, either then or now, that you really admired or that you really admire even now to this day? And I know that you're gotten away from the church to some degree, but I just wonder, are there any artists that you admire? And I'll ask the same thing of Maestro Curry, because when I thought of the background that you had some time, a lot of time, it looked like, with Christian music, I was wondering if there were some popular ones that you enjoyed at that time.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I loved music much more actually in my youth, before I was with Christianity. So I would listen to Christian music all the time, only Christian music, because that was part of my being a good Christian way of coping. And, you know, for me, as far as the artists, I would more, and I'm still this way, I'm more focused on this individual songs than the artists. My husband's, you know, the opposite. He is, you know, music obsessed. He's more the music person in our family. But yeah, just depending on the songs. And I remember, you know, a couple artists like Casting Crowns was a great band, but something we're seeing, you know, even within those in more leadership positions within Christianity. So musicians, pastors, people in these roles, we're seeing also leave Christianity and do what's called deconstruction. So it's interesting to look back on a lot of the artists who also aren't necessarily, you know, Christian anymore. But music is very powerful. It was something I loved, you know, so much. I still love music. It's a beautiful tool, but it's absolutely a tool. It has an impact on the brain, and it's a beautiful thing. And during the time, it was definitely a tool that I used to feel more connected to God.
Well, as far as what might be called Christian music, to begin with, modern Christian music, I've never cared about the lyrics of songs or in the operas. I'm listening to the melody and the harmony. So if someone's shouting about the glory of Jesus, I'm not noticing it. I'm noticing if the bass player is flat or if the drums are a little bit off. Mm-hmm. Now, most of the great classical composers wrote a lot for the church on commission. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them were not true believers. And how can you spot a true believer in a piece for instruments only? You can't prove anything. Bach, I hear the Spirit of God. In Mozart, I feel he is the apostle of human joy. In the symphonies of Anton Bruckner, to me, if God could write symphonies, they would sound like the symphonies of Anton Bruckner. No, I cannot prove that. And I believe maybe the Greeks were onto something. Didn't they have many gods? Well, I hear the God of the forest and nature in the music of Jan Sibelius. So that, to me, my beginning of being obsessed with music is when I heard in 7th grade a piece by Paul Hindemith, the Matthias der Maler Symphony, which is begins with a musical halo and then depicts a beautiful picture of Jesus and angels. Well, I wasn't so much interested in the picture, but I heard in this music spirituality without reading the liner notes and looking at the record jacket. So from that point on, of course, I like Rhapsody in Blue. No one could possibly love Louis Armstrong more than me or Richard Rodgers. But if I'm to take only a few hours of music to Mars in case of some kind of catastrophe, for me, music is at its best when there's a spiritual essence which I can prove to my inner self, but not to anyone else.
That's beautiful. I love that point.
I love that point as well and everything. You mentioned it, a couple of you, I mean, both of you mentioned it in the past and everything, this notion of cancel culture. And I'm thinking that a lot of the greats of the day would have been canceled in the modern day and everything. And you kind of alluded to that, Maestro Curry and everything. But because a lot of them had lifestyles that would not be approved of, to, if I can use that terminology, even though I don't try to make judgments about what people's lifestyles are and everything. But I just wondered how many of the greats, including the greats of classical, would probably have been canceled if they were living in the 21st century. I'm thinking that Beethoven and Hugo, if I can go to art and everything, and even Picasso and a number of others would probably be canceled at this particular time. But I just wanted y'all's both take on the notion of cancel culture, and would the greats of history have been canceled if they were to descend on the earth in this particular day and time?
Well, if I can start, I can start. Yeah. When someone says, I cannot enjoy that artwork by Pablo Picasso because I think he was anti-Semitic. So I can get that, because the moment I decided to become a professional musician is when I was 14 and playing a piece by Wagner in an orchestra, and I had an out-of-body experience. If that had happened in math class or on the trampoline, my life would have had a different direction. Instead, again, the spirituality of this hit me. I'm going to become a musician. Now, fast forward to first year at Oberlin Conservatory. I read a book just out that said Wagner was probably the worst anti-Semitic in musical history. And I couldn't listen to any of his music for at least a year, and maybe longer than that. And occasionally, if I go there with new research and find out how deep he goes into the dark side, for a while, the music is, I can't go there for a while. So I don't say it's silly. You know, they don't play Wagner in Israel because of the anti-Semitism. But there are no operas that are anti-Semitic by Wagner. None of the poetry or lyrics, whatever, are anti-Semitic. So it's called, I'm sure the church has a fine way of saying, separate the sin from the artist or something like that. So that's, for me, an important thing to do, because look, Wagner cannot be ignored. And he was truly the greatest German composer after Beethoven in the 19th century. So you can ignore him, but not if you're like in love with music and it's the center of your life. So I'm serious when I say, you know, evidently a lot of people are forgiving Trump. And so let's forgive Picasso, because honestly, you know, I'm deeply flawed, and I have had stuff in my life that I've been redeemed from. So, but some of that stuff is done on the internet, as you said, Michaela, forever. So this is going to shut down young people. I saw some lunatic, a billionaire, talking about how he was going to not hire people that were involved in the so-called anti-Israel protests at the Ivy League colleges. It wasn't anti-Israel. It was like saying, hey, this thing in Gaza is not cool. But he's not going to hire those people after college. Now, let me tell you, are those kids going to remember that? Oh, yeah, because they're going to say, you know what? I'll have time for integrity when I'm 30. And then it never stops, though. I'll have time for integrity when I get my 3 kids out of private school, and then when I have my second home. So this is an interesting era. Most people will fail the test. Human nature is to survive. Most people are not good or evil. It's called, we're all animals, and the number one rule is to survive. And as Shakespeare's Falstaff said, I can't eat integrity. Honor will not house me. A lot of people are going to take the dive and disappear like ostriches in the sand. And there are going to be other people that say, you know what, I can't. Who was the woman? Cassidy Hutchinson. Cassidy Hutchinson, that was part of the Trump inner circle. She spoke up at the January 6 hearings. And she said, I'm not going to lie because I want to be able to pass the mirror and look at myself. So most people, they won't look in the mirror, or they'll say, my 2 kids are eating. None of this is easy.
Yep, none of it's easy. Along those same lines, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Ms. Castro and everything. But Another part of your background that I find very interesting, and I don't know if Maestro Curry had it. I had it for about 2 years, and part of it was I thought it was because of a protest around health. They told me it was actually because they wanted to study African studies, and the school wasn't offering it. So for a couple of years, in the fifth and I think it was the fifth and part of the sixth grade, or it might have been fourth and fifth, I was homeschooled and everything. I'm now in my early 60s and everything. But yeah, mom even talks about that because she actually joked with me the last time that I saw her, and I'll see her tomorrow and everything, that she's surprised that we still talk and that we didn't like probably kill each other because she was homeschooling me and all along those lines. And I was probably being a stubborn child. And I'm sure that even my brother, who's 7 years younger, because he probably wouldn't have been in school. He would have been in the kindergarten. So we were probably driving her crazy in our own way and everything. So I just wanted your thoughts about because one of the things that the network is big on is education and the reform of the education system. So I just wanted your take on where we are in education, and should more people maybe spend a year or two getting homeschooled? Because like I said, I had that experience in fourth and fifth. Everything else was in the public school system, including my college at Marquette. But what is your take on homeschooling and education in general?
Yeah, so I'm going to comment real fast on cancel culture, because even earlier, Master Curry, you were talking about how everyone has their flaws, and this is true. So looking back in history, if we're trying to judge a person and whether or not to consume their content based on what they've done, well, if it's someone in the past and they are no longer here, there's no reconciliation there. And so if it's something that we need to cope with, like you mentioned when you found out that the person, the musician that you had your out of body experience around, when you found out about their anti-Semitism, you needed some time to process. It's a personal decision. But as far as today's cancel culture for those still alive, of course, there are the people who are going to give the apologies just to have it said and done. However, we talked about the conspiracies and other topics already too. We are in some ways products of what we know, what we are exposed to, what we are taught. And sometimes that leads to things that we find out later on is not good and is not healthy. So, a lot of the mistakes of those of the past were a result of us as a society not being as evolved as we are now. And even now, we're bound to make mistakes. And, I think a big fuel for cancel culture is that so many people have gotten so frustrated with the just shrugging of shoulders of so many atrocities. So we've taken an opposite extreme of being so rigid around people making mistakes, where we need to find a middle ground of acknowledging what's not okay and calling it out, while also being able to, forgive and move on for those who show that they're willing to change, not just give the apology, but do the work to change. But with that being said, speaking of homeschooling, I have had pretty much every kind of schooling experience out there. So I went to public school during most of my elementary years. One of those years, we were living in Italy and Sicily, and I was at a private Catholic school run by nuns. So I've done the private, I've done the public, I've done the homeschool all at home. Nowadays, you can do homeschool online. So I've done that as well. And I've done the co-op or out classes homeschool, where all these homeschoolers get together, usually in like a church, and are taught by, maybe one mom teaches one subject, another mom teaches another subject, or families will pay someone to teach a subject to their kids. So, I've experienced, all of it. And I think it's really, unique of the person. Should people try homeschooling? It really depends on what the experience is for them in their schools. Unfortunately, there is a lot of variety in the types of education children in these countries get. Some communities and some schools are very poorly funded. And, their teachers aren't well funded, the schools aren't well funded, and the education of the children there suffers. And it's mainly, in communities of color, unfortunately. But, some schools, like, I have some relatives who are in public school and they have a great education, but they're also in a great neighborhood. So it really just kind of depends. Of course, bullying is another big problem in schools. So depending on the severity of that, sometimes that's a really good reason to move to public schooling or homeschooling. But it really depends, because there are risks with homeschooling as well. People can be neglected. Children can be neglected. Nobody sees or knows what's going on. Or sometimes their education is neglected. Now, there's also this big phenomena of unschooling that's going on, where children are encouraged to learn on their own accord. They're not forced to practice things and read things and learn things, which, can be, I can see the negative in it, but I can also see the positive. Creating a mentality around education of not force, but of, opportunity. And they're creating that eagerness and love of learning without it being, imposed on a child. So there's all kinds of things out there. And I think it just really depends on the person and the family and what the parents are able to provide if they are considering homeschooling their kids.
Good point and everything. Hey, just really quickly for both of you, and we'll wrap up in about another 15, 20 minutes or something like that. But just a quick thought. How important do you think it is to have that balance in life and everything as well? Because I know one thing we talked about on this network, and I think the last time you were on my show, Carrie, we talked about this as well, is I'm a big believer that people are concerned about, of course, their physical health and making sure that they are in tip-top physical health and even mental health. And I would add emotional and definitely to some spiritual, because I definitely think of it being more spiritual than religious and everything. And some people have told me that I have left out the physical health and everything. But I'm just wondering, how much do you find that you are balanced in your health journeys and everything? And do you find that one overweighs the other, or do you try to be balanced in all of them and make sure that they are, if I can use another term that people use a lot, aligned and everything like that? But I just wanted y'all's take on the alignment of those 5 critical parts of our life, being the emotional, the mental, the physical, and the spiritual, and yes, even the physical as well.
At my best, I'm vigilant, and at my worst, I am not vigilant at all. So the idea is to, again, what did Plato say? Moderation in everything. Don't go crazy over everything. I keep hearing, maybe it's not true, maybe it is true about the young generation, that they're more attracted to the so-called soft life, where it's not the grind, 9 to 5, 48 hours a week, something like that. Make sure you have a time to be a person. And that seems totally healthy to me. And I look on the internet, and occasionally I'm channel surfing. I don't see any people in their 20s working. I mean, no one's got a job. They're either like working out or at the partying or something like that. And it seems to me that what someone said the other day, we have to bring back the dignity of work. As Goethe said, work is good. It takes your mind off yourself a bit. So work has been great for me, and I've learned how to relax, but it's not easy for me, because I'm always like, a performer will always be saying, it's even the title of someone's book, I really should be practicing. Well, let's go out, let's go to the movie, let's go see Wicked. Well, I really should be practicing. And that becomes, I don't know if you remember Schroeder, the pianist in Charles Schultz Peanuts, where always, leave me alone. I'll be there. So yeah, the ideal is to have some kind of balance. For instance, I realize this, I'm writing my memoirs for Indiana University Press. I'm 2 years behind. And I'm realizing now that I took really good care of William Henry Curry. But I didn't even know there was a William Curry until I was 30. That wasn't any kind of consequence to me. I'm obsessed with music. I'm going to be a musician, books, et cetera, So being liked as a gay and a black person growing up in my era, look, I didn't care whether everyone liked me or not, because likely they weren't. And so I built up my own world as William Henry Curry. But William Curry, I had to discover little bit by little bit and develop that person. And through the help of God, and through a small circle of friends, I've redeemed that obliviousness that was part of my life, the first third.
Yeah, when we neglect parts of ourselves, there's absolutely suffering that comes from that. And like you said, there's the 5 different areas that are important, and we need to invest in all of them to be, at our best. So unfortunately, it's hard, and this is why I think you're seeing a lot of young people reject the 48-hour work week and kind of a thing, because it's hard to make the time for all these different parts of ourselves, when we're spending so much time working, especially for someone else's benefit. I mean, of course, for our benefit too, to get the money to pay the bills. But, with that being said, physical health is absolutely important. It impacts our mental health. There are people who say it even impacts our spiritual health, and I can see that. So investing in that is important. I too have had seasons where I'm all or nothing when it comes to working on my physical health. And sometimes, in my opinion, we need to accept the different seasons. There was a time for me where I struggled and I didn't do any exercise at all. I was worried about injury and all these different things. And I just accepted that as a season. And yes, there were consequences to that, to my health and my mental health. And now, I'm slowly getting back into it, doing yoga, doing walks. Now I'm more comfortable with those. I'm getting more into strength training and running again. So, we also want to be careful, because there can be that all or nothing dynamic, which is part of what I work with as well. People with eating disorders. If we get too focused on our health, it can be almost like another dogmatic religion, where you are good if you eat this and you are bad if you eat that, where balance is important. And when it comes to work, I wanted to comment real quick on that as well. Work is absolutely also very important for us. If we don't have direction, it is not good for our mental health. Of course, when we don't get movement, that's not good for our physical health. So work is very valuable. I think a lot of people are shifting their view of work. So, not wanting to give their lives to, the benefit of a CEO when they're really reaping most of the rewards, kind of a thing. But it is important to have balance and to focus on all of these 5 areas, as Mark mentioned.
Yeah, just along those same lines and everything. One of the things that I sometimes don't think we don't deal enough with, everybody's got trauma, and I know that's part of your work, Ms. Castro, and everything, but how often do we even address the traumas that we've had? Because that was trauma in school, or that was trauma in life, trauma in relationships. But I think a lot of people have tried to duck trauma and try to even duck the treatment of trauma, whether that's self-treatment or whether that's treatment through counselors like yourself and everything. So how good as a society, and I mean even a world society, do you think we do in terms of dealing with trauma and everything? Because I know you're very much into trauma healing, and it can be something as simple as a breakup in life, or of course something as more complex as the loss of a loved one, whether that's a elderly relative or something more devastating like a young person in your life and everything. But how, as a society, do you think we deal with trauma, and do you think we pay enough attention to it, and does even our media pay enough attention to it?
I'm gonna let you step.
No, that was you, Miss. Yeah, that was you, Miss Castro. So, how do you think we're doing in terms of trauma healing?
Okay, awesome. So, yeah, I absolutely. I mean, obviously, we have a long way to go, but things are starting to shift in the area of trauma. And again, I think this is part of where we're doing like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like a knee-jerk reaction with the cancel culture. We're going kind of too far in some aspects, because we're recognizing that, racial trauma, sexual trauma, religious trauma, all these different areas haven't been acknowledged enough in the past. And so there's been this knee-jerk reaction. So I do see progress in our acknowledgement of trauma. We definitely have a long way to go. Something that I find really powerful and promising is the growth of leaders in this in the area of trauma healing, such as Dr. Nicole LePera and Dr. Gabor Mate, who are very big on this newer idea of what they call complex trauma, so complex PTSD. In the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health Illnesses, trauma is uh, framed as something for these really extreme events. So, as Mark used the example of like, tragically losing a loved one. But the reality is that trauma can be complex in the sense that it could be this seemingly small event, such as, even just being told by a parent that, you're a terrible child. Even if that's just a heat of the moment thing they say, but they're giving their child, love in other moments, that it has an impact on the nervous system. It gets stuck in the brain repeats it, and it creates this whole neural pathway. So I like to see trauma as a spectrum. Often we feel uncomfortable using the word trauma for anything other than, in the past it was war. Then it became more accepted to be used in the terms of like sexual assault and whatnot. But nowadays, even when it comes to, trauma of childhood, it doesn't have to be this horrific abuse. It can just be, emotional neglect, or being taught that it's, you have to make other people happy and not stick out like a sore thumb. That can be trauma in the sense that it has an impact on us, and it impacts future decisions that we make. It contributes to anxiety and depression because we're not able to be our authentic selves. So trauma is this huge spectrum and huge topic, but I am seeing that we are starting to gain more knowledge around it. And especially with this understanding of complex PTSD, I think that we're on the right track. It's just going to take more time for us to really make even more progress.
Well, good luck with that. I think if my parents have parents, both of them lost their mother and father very early in life, and they were raised by grandparents who were quite severe and quite strict, and never showed them any love or approval. And as a consequence, my parents were stingy with praise, and I found myself until 25 years ago being something of an approval withholder myself. And I see that passed on to one of my other family members who's also that way. And it's interesting to see trauma dating back to 1902 still showing its face in 2024. So all this is extremely important. And I good luck on guiding us to a better thinking about that.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Definitely appreciate that, because I know even with trauma, one of the things I've heard people, and sometimes it's like you, Maestro Curry, I listen to some of the right-wing media as well, and there's this notion of reverse trauma, because I've heard that from some of my white counterparts, where they will say that they are not to blame, and you kind of alluded to that earlier, for the sins of the past, and they sometimes feel that we are doing a disservice to these kids because they were not involved. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that attitude, but I have heard that from a couple of people where they're feeling like that, those were the folks like 3 or 4 generations and we had nothing to do with it. So why are you traumatizing us and everything? So I just wonder, is that something that you hear, Ms. Castro, and everything as well? Because I have heard some people that make this accusation that, they understand the trauma that African Americans might be going through, but then they feel like it's reverse trauma to them because they're feeling like they're being blamed for something that they're not at fault for. And that's kind of the thing that I've heard from the right-wing media. But I just wanted your take on that. And is that something that you have dealt with in your own practices?
Yeah, within my practice, personally, it hasn't really come up within my practice, but I will say that, as a white person who does try to be aware and all of that, I've heard of these ideas of racism towards white people and all of that, which isn't real. I mean, there can be a stigma, but there's not the power dynamic because of all the history of colonialism and the history of specifically white men having most of the power. Because of that dynamic, it's not racism. But as far as like reverse trauma, just because you are learning about and seeing in society how people are holding the white race accountable for the actions of and the crimes that were committed against people of color, doesn't mean that you are being attacked. And I think that's part of this, reverse trauma feeling, is that we hear all the time about, white people this and white people that, and people start to take it personal. Well, unless someone is in your face, causing harm to you, committing, verbal abuse or physical abuse to you, that's not trauma. That's something for you to work through, the discomfort of knowing that people of your ancestors, were part of the problem. But within my practice specifically, it hasn't come up. No.
Well, I'm reminded of the great Norwegian Ibsen. If you're with the majority, it's time for some self-reckoning. You're probably wrong. And I don't want to say I'm in my post-racial era, but this is my take on it. Whoever is in charge is going to think they're superior and going to kick behind. If black people had been in charge, they would have done the same thing, enslaved white people. Unless we just get away from thinking this is a racial thing, it's not. It is a human thing. We have met the enemy and he is us. And I don't hear anyone talking about that. I know who's been in charge in this country, but the problem is much more cosmic than that. This is an earth problem. Everywhere, the people in charge want to be in charge, and they want to keep their money, and you're dirty. Well, that's what we have to learn.
I agree.
Let's come back and everything. Hold on. That makes a lot of sense. Hey, Mr. Curry, this is a pivot slightly in the conversation and everything, but one thing, because you mentioned this earlier and I meant to get back to it, and it comes back to the notion of perfectionists and everything along those lines. But I know that even in doing events, whether it's podcasts or whether it's doing events, because I also do events as well and everything, I can sometimes be the worst critic of myself, but I can also sometimes be the worst critic of others. And I've had friends of mine that tell me that they don't like going to concerts because they're trying to figure out what they would have done differently or how they would have handled it. So I was just wondering, as a conductor, when you go and hear another conductor, are you sitting there thinking of what you would have done differently versus what he's done and everything? Because I know even at events, and sometimes it can cause you to lose focus on the event because you're sitting there thinking, well, if I had been the one doing this particular concert, I might have had so-and-so open versus the person that they had to open and everything. So I'm just wondering how much of that criticism of others do you do when you're going to watch a concert for fun and not just the concert that you're working? Because I know we all do a self-assessment after the show and everything, but how much do you do self-assessment if you're going out? Like maybe, I know you're not a movie director, I know you said you're an avid reader, but maybe you're going to watch a movie, you're thinking to yourself, I really wish that score had sounded like that instead of this, or I wish that actor had played this instead of that actor. So how much criticism of shows that you watch do you actually get involved in, or do you try to stay out of your own head?
I had to consciously turn on Toscanini, who I think was inarguably the greatest conductor of the 20th century, was asked at the end of his life, out of your 300 recordings of pieces, what is your favorite? He said, I want to burn them all. When I worked with John Williams for 1 week, I said, what is it like to hear your music in a big theater? Like, for instance, Star Wars. He said he had never seen Star Wars in a big theater. He'd only seen it on that small box that you look at when you're creating the score or creating the ideas for the score. I said, why haven't you seen Star Wars? Because he said, well, in bar 14, that trombone should have been an F sharp instead of an A and all that. So I have to, I'll tell you if I can quickly. I remember turning on the radio once in my car and I said, oh, I've forgotten. My performance of Beethoven's Third Symphony, a radio broadcast, is going to be on the radio tonight. So I'm driving home and listening to this Beethoven Eroica Symphony. And I'm saying, I think I need to sell shoes. I mean, this is terrible. This is terrible. So I reach home crestfallen. Then the announcer comes on and says, well, I'm sorry, we couldn't find Curry's performance tonight of Beethoven 3. Instead, it was Leonard Bernstein with In Europe Philharmonic. Now, if I had known it was Leonard Bernstein, I wouldn't have heard or been so upset about those flaws. But since I heard it as Bill Curry, I'm thinking, give it up. So brings me joy is when I hear someone do something really well. And that these days it doesn't matter, an acting role, a singing role. I heard Ella Fitzgerald sing "A House Is Not a Home" this morning, and my eyes are open to quality now, whether it's a golf game or whether it's Ella Fitzgerald or a Beethoven symphony performance. Excellence based on perfectionism and talent and discipline is what turns me on these days.
Yeah, we are our worst critic. Absolutely.
Along those, I don't know, along those same lines, what about you, Miss Castro, and everything? Because I'm thinking that even when you were writing the book, that there were probably times that you wanted to, as Maestro Curry said, toss the book out and toss some of the things that you've done out, including your plans that you've done with your life coach and everything. So, are there times that you have been your own worst critic as well?
I went through so much of that growing up, being so critical towards myself that I'm actually in a period of kind of like shutting that part off. It'll absolutely come back on over and over and over again, but I do a lot of conscious work to recognize that it's just trying to protect me. It's just trying to hold me back because that feels safer to stay in the known. And I just work to ignore it and do my best. Sometimes there's like an extra leap of faith there where I just kind of throw things out and then later think like, oh, maybe I should have, been a little more critical and worked on it a little bit more. So finding a balance there, but absolutely, we are all our own worst critic. And the sooner we can just recognize that and recognize when it's happening, recognize that this is just a part trying to protect us and take what helps and let go of the rest. Otherwise, that, like we talked about earlier, that imposter syndrome and that self-criticalness will just keep us from ever producing anything. So it's definitely something to navigate.
And there's so many that hated their most popular piece. Rachmaninoff, C-sharp minor prelude, Ravel, Bolero, Tchaikovsky, the Nutcracker. He said was a failure. What? Because he saw something in there and that spooked him forever. And sometimes he would tear up a piece immediately after he conducted it, the world premiere. So we now know that he was overdoing it. And I think of Stephen Sondheim, one of my favorite 20th century composers, who said to get rid of this self-critical thing, dare I say it, he would get high before he would sit down at the piano. And that for him worked. Now, I don't recommend that. I wouldn't recommend it for myself for a number of reasons, including I would depend on it in order to free my spirit. So like you, I try to let it go. It comes back. I brush it off my shoulder.
Gotta do it.
That makes a lot of sense and everything. I don't want to say that makes a lot of sense. Along those same lines, like I said, I'll wrap up very shortly with a question I ask everybody on these shows and everything. But how do you deal with the whole notion of knowing your worth? And that's something that I've brought up on this show as well and other shows, because I know a lot of people don't know their worth or are afraid to ask for their worth and everything. So this is for you, Ms. Castro, as well as you, Maestro Curry. But a lot of times artists and even scientists and doctors don't know their worth and unfortunately don't always charge their worth. I must say my eye doctor, because I got a field test earlier today, he must have known his worth because that was a very quick test and I wound up paying like $135. So I think he knew his worth and everything. But how much do you think that we don't know our worth, and how do you go about knowing what your worth is and making sure that you are asking for what you are worth?
Yeah. So as far as knowing our worth and asking for our worth, I mean, for starters, again, spirituality helps in this arena because, we have inherent worth. We have inherent worth just for being ourselves. And when it comes to requesting what we're worth, when it comes to our services, even if it's something like, as a therapist, I am talking to someone. I'm using all the training that I have invested time and energy into. But, that's not that much different than the artist who is, selling a painting. And there may have been much time that went into that painting, not to mention all the time that went into, practicing and refining their skills. And this applies to every area of work. So recognizing, what is involved in being able to provide this service. It's not just the exchange, it's everything that preceded that. And remembering that inherent worth, and with that, to be able to continue to provide a service, you need to be taken care of. And in this world, to be taken care of, we need money so that we can pay our bills, so that we can manage our stress levels, so that we can, afford food that nourishes us, all these different aspects. So really perspective, I think, is what it boils down to. Having perspective and noticing when the fear creeps up about asking for your worth. Again, it's those parts. Parts is a big idea in internal family systems therapy. And we have different parts, different opinions, basically, that come up that say, you shouldn't do this, when a part of you knows that you want to do this and thinks that you should, or that it's right, or that it's, part of your journey to do what you're doing. So just acknowledging the parts for what they are, being grateful that they're trying to protect you, but leaning into your higher knowledge and your higher power and saying, okay, I know that I feel resistance to asking for my worth because I'm afraid of being rejected or XYZ. But ultimately, this is my path. This is something I need to get a fair exchange for because of everything I've invested into this and everything I need to take care of myself. And with that, just, again, facing the fear and doing it. What are your thoughts, Master Curry?
Well, when I think of my composing, the last major work for large orchestra I wrote was a commission from the North Carolina Symphony. And as I was driving downtown to Mamandy Hall, I started to hallucinate. I was so afraid. And it's related to this. As Aaron Copland told me, remember, as a composer, you're being judged against Beethoven and Mozart. So it's got to be a masterpiece. So I've learned, if I love it, somebody else will love it. Some people don't love Mozart. To me, it's all about love. My late partner was a great chef, and he said, you can taste the love or the lack of it in the food. When I hear myself doing a piece, and I'm obviously just doing it in a professional manner, I can hear the lack of love. When I'm completely unhinged and at one with the message of the music, then I hear it. It's kind of intangible. It's hard to describe. Is the tempo different? Well, all that. So the things I appreciate are when I hear the spirit of love and complete sincerity, and that makes me know that I did a good job.
Beautiful.
Wow. Come back. Yeah, that's amazing. That the notion of having that belief in yourself and everything like that, and everything in that kind of way. Because a lot of people, I feel, don't have a belief in themselves and are willing to let the critics of the world get in their way as well. So I'll ask you that and everything, Ms. Castro. How do you deal with those critics and everything? Because I know that definitely in the arts there are the critics that are out there, and that's part of their job. I even have my dad's girlfriend, a longtime girlfriend, and Lady Love has been a dance critic for years and is a esteemed dance critic, Linda Bellins, and everything, in addition to being an education pioneer and all in that space. But I just wanted your thoughts about how did you deal with the criticism? Because I'm sure that whether it was in school or even in your own family, that you faced those criticisms from outside. So how did you deal with those criticisms, and did you find a way to either use those criticisms as fuel to make you better, or did you find a way to even reach back and to let the folks know that you did not appreciate the criticism if you didn't appreciate the criticism?
Yeah. I mean, as long as you are willing to do something, to create something, there are going to be haters. There are going to be people who don't appreciate it, that don't prefer it. And that's just part of putting yourself out there, part of creating things. Like Master Curry mentioned, some people don't like Mozart, and some people don't like Beethoven. Some of the people that are seen as the greatest, there are still people who don't like them. So there are going to be people who are going to not like you or not like what you do. So being open to that and acknowledging that, not expecting that everyone is going to have something nice to say or is going to say nothing at all. There are people who are going to give their opinion, unfortunately, even if it's not helpful or constructive, and that's fine. That's their right, if that's what they want to do. But the way I handle it when I have received criticism, again, especially speaking out to support people in leaving religion. Some people have, even family members have conveyed to me their opinion of this being even like Antichrist work and things along those lines. So just acknowledging for me that this is their perspective. They can have their perspective no matter what I do. And this is really helpful for me too, is knowing that no matter what I do, somebody's not going to like it. Even if I, do nothing and say nothing to protect myself, somebody's going to have a judgment against that too. So I might as well, again, with that acknowledgement that, we have inherent worth, that to be at our best, we need to take care of, all these different areas of our lives and practice authenticity. And even with the knowledge that in order to do the most good, being at our best allows us to actually do more good. So even if it's like from a selfless lens, it still requires that healthy selfishness of, following your heart and following your passions and speaking up for yourself and taking the time to take care of those 5 areas of life that we talked about earlier. So just acknowledging that it's going to happen no matter what. And when it does happen, as a therapist, and as we discussed earlier, the importance of feeling our feelings is huge. So even if I know it's irrational, even if I know it makes sense that this person would say this and I don't actually care what they think and X, Y, Z, sometimes emotions come up and I know the importance of letting myself feel them. So there are times where I might cry like a little girl. And I know this is actually my little girl. This is my inner child who is feeling this, because my adult self knows I don't give a crap about this person's opinion. But it's coming up. So there's something held on to from the past that needs to be released. And if we allow ourselves to do that, that actually relieves our body of a lot of stressful hormones that are retained, even if it happened decades ago. Science is showing that a lot of chronic illness and autoimmune diseases and even chronic pain are unaddressed emotions. At one point, this was woo-woo. Now we're seeing it more in actual science. So allowing what happens to happen, releasing control. People are going to have their opinions. It's my job to honor me. And if I have feelings about it, process it, but I don't need to think about it. I just need to feel it, move on, and focus on what's right for me.
Yes, well said. You should speak to every performer I've ever known. It's like Richard Burton said he didn't read reviews, because if they said he did a wonderful job last night as Hamlet, he would say, why didn't they say I was the greatest Hamlet ever? And the negative reviews upset you. Some of this is envy. Some of it is simple common decency. I mean, if someone were to read a poem and I knew them or didn't know them, I would find them and compliment them on whatever I found that was good in that. But a lot of people don't think that performers need a compliment. I like the story of at the world premiere of Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet. His masterpiece is, as far as a short piece, he was seated at the table between 2 ladies. They didn't say anything to him because they didn't think he needed to hear something. Mm-hmm. But I knew one associate conductor that I worked with all the great conductors in the world as guest conductors. And I'd say, what do they all have in common? They're all insecure. We all put ourselves in the middle, in the center, to control something and to get more than our fair share of praise. So as a result of thinking through this, and not as well as you just articulated it, self-reward. And I will not let myself ever be an approval withholder ever again.
Hey, along the, see if I can add myself again.
You're here. Oh,
hey, along those same lines.
No, you're not. You lost your mark.
We'll continue.
Come back.
Okay, there you are.
There I go. And everything along those same lines and in that space, in that way and everything. One of the things that I sometimes get frustrated about, and I'd love to hear both of your thoughts, is some people have their dreams, but other people will dictate their dreams and everything. So I know that we like to be supportive of our friends and acquaintances. So I know it happens in music, I know it happens in the arts, and it happens in therapy and everything. So I was just wondering, how do you deal with folks that are trying to get you to live their dream and everything? Because I know that is a part of one of the traumas that goes on, is that I'm not saying you can't be supportive, because you definitely want to be supportive of your friends and acquaintances, but I do know that even in the arts, sometimes people will want you to be more supportive of their ambition than your own ambition. So I was just wondering, as a therapist, how do you deal with that? And is that something that you've seen in your own life coaching and stuff, where people will be trying to get you to support them and not necessarily seeing if it's adding fuel to your own fire and your own desires?
Well, ultimately, as we've been discussing, authenticity is extremely important in taking care of ourselves, because without taking care of ourselves, how can we take care of others if we are sick, or we are dead, or we are sitting in bed depressed? So, along those lines, if somebody is coming to me, whether it's a friend or a client, and they're seeking my support for their dream, well, in therapy, it's not really appropriate for me to give an opinion. I will guide them to have more insight into what their opinion is, and to, recognize if this is them being authentic to themselves, or maybe, following a dream that actually someone else put onto them. So it's important that we all follow what's right for ourselves. If I understood the question right, and somebody is trying to get me to support them more than, supporting myself, that's where boundaries come into play. We can't please everyone. So people will have expectations, unfortunately, and expect a certain level of excitement for the dream that they're pursuing, or certain actions of support. And if it aligns with my values and with my self-care, I am happy to provide that. But when it doesn't, there needs to be that barrier, that boundary of communication to say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And if someone gets upset, they're responsible for those feelings. I'm not responsible for another person's feelings. We're all responsible for our own feelings. So just being able to be comfortable with someone being upset with us is also part of a skill set in being able to navigate all of this.
Well, on that theme, I found performing artists to be uniformly extremely narcissistic, and very few of them actually supportive of anyone else's efforts. So as a consequence, upon recognizing that, I've tried to be different than that. I know two of Leonard Bernstein's children, Jamie and Alexander, and they have told me so many things about it wasn't such a happy life being such a great all-around great musician and the toast of the world. For instance, he never got compliments from his colleagues, and that's what he wanted more than anything else. Not the random generic audience applause, but he wanted a composer to tell him, composer. That's really, he had lots of ego gratification as a conductor, but a composer, he wanted a composer to compliment him. That never happened, because they were thinking, this man's making $10 million a year as a conductor, and he wrote West Side Story, and I'm envious. So I have tried to translate for the last 30 years every negative thing consciously into something positive. I shall not do that. Oops, I messed up again. Let me do that differently this time. And like I said, God watches me and God forgives me, and then it takes me longer to forgive myself. But I'm constantly thinking of how can I help other people? That's what makes me one of the world's great mentors.
I would agree.
Appreciate that and everything. And you're right, there is oftentimes not as much support as there should be in the artistic community and everything. Why do you think that is, Maestro Kerry? And then I've got the question I was going to ask y'all, and we'll wrap it up after you answer that. But why do you think that there is such a silo effect within the artistic community? Because you kind of alluded to that, and I definitely feel that even with arts administrators and artists in general. So, and it's not just music, it's also, I've seen it in different genres, whether it's funk or jazz or classical, or even different mediums as well, whether it's art or whether it's dance or a number of other things. There's kind of was a friend of mine calls the crab in the barrel mentality. So I just wonder, why do you think that exists?
Envy, insecurity. Like I mentioned, I'm reading a book about Ralph Ellison now. I forget the author, but I've heard this line in every book I've ever read about African American males back to slavery. African American males tend not to help each other as much as their women do. And this author posits that the reason is, there's too much competition. If there's one black guy in a building, he really doesn't want to see another one because he liked being the exception to the rule. He was the good one. And so instead of reaching down to help other people up, you get into this bubble where you think, well, I'm different. I think, frankly, Clarence Thomas is an example of that, who benefited from affirmative action. And then when someone said in grad school, I guess you're just here because you're black, then he had to go to the other side of the fence because he was so wounded by that. All the work he had done was ruined because the Democratic policy of affirmative action canceled it. Envy, narcissism, weakness.
It's interesting you said that, because a long time ago, it probably was in the late 80s or maybe the early 90s, when I worked briefly at the Boca Raton News in Florida, just in between Delray Beach and Deerfield and everything, and not that far from West Palm Beach and everything like that. There was a newspaper editor, and he was the only African American editor. And at the time I went there, and it was a brief time that I worked at that newspaper, maybe like 6 months and everything, I did get that impression that he was like being the big fish in the pond, and he definitely gave me, and there was a Latin American lady reporter, a hard time. And like I said, I did not stay in that job for a long time, partially because of that frustration with him. So I do think that there is that crab in the barrel mentality that's been there for a while, because he probably liked being the big fish in the pond and the only fish in the pond. And then when somebody else came in there that had a similar background, he was doing things, in my mind, to sabotage it. He might disagree with me, but that's the impression that I got and everything. So definitely it seemed like there was some sabotage going on in that space. Well, this has been a fun 2 hours. I know I had to bounce in and out because it was done differently than I used to do it when I'm at home, but I did have to come to Hey Ty and everything. But it's still been another great conversation. I know Maestro Curry has done it before, and I'm hoping that you'll come back as well, Ms. Castro, and we'll for some more conversation on this show, The Online Dinner Party, because I love having various guests. Sometimes it's 2. I think the last time Maestro came on, it was like 5 or something like that. So it varies the amount, but something I get every show to end is if you can tell folks how they can reach you and everything, and anything that you haven't said that you'd like to say and everything. And then because we are a international platform and all along those lines, I am one, it's kind of my own ministry that loves to give a message of positivity from my guests and everything. So if you want to share a message of positivity, I'm sure folks would love to hear that as well. So that's how we'll close out. So I guess we'll go, well, I'll let y'all choose, but it can either be ladies first, or Maestro may decide that he wants to be defer and be the age over the wisdom thing as well. So I'll let y'all decide as I bounce out and everything. But whichever order you want to go into, the thing that you need to do, and I'll play some commercials afterwards to get us on out of here totally, is your message of positivity and how you can be reached, and anything that you didn't say that you would like to say, as we've touched on a number of issues that I promised you we would.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure being here. It's been so wonderful talking with you, Master Curry. I'm going to have to find you and follow you wherever you're at online, if you are, which I'm sure you're about to share. But yeah, so I guess my message of positivity would be that, for starters, my passion right now is spirituality. After I left religion, my passion turned to mental health. Obviously, I still immensely value that. But, I am seeing the need for spirituality and the possibility of spirituality with or without faith. Faith is something that many people struggle with. It's something that I feel greatly enriches my life. But I understand the struggle because I couldn't do it for 10 years after religious trauma personally. But you can have spirituality even without faith. So there are ways to invest in your spirituality even without believing in the unknown, just by connecting with nature, just by, paying attention to your emotions and practicing mindfulness, practicing breathing exercises, noticing what it feels like to feel love and to work on building more of that in your life. But, as far as how people can reach me, my handle is Michaela's Mind Munchies on all platforms, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. On Facebook, I'm Michaela Giordano Castro. I do have a Facebook group for those who may be seeking to heal from religion and build spirituality outside of religion. That's called Unbound Faith, Reconstructing Religion After Christianity. So you can search that up and join our group, or just add me on any platforms. And I'm constantly creating content to try to provide value in this area for those kind of navigating this path. But again, it's been a pleasure being here.
Ms. Castro, I've learned so much from you, and I do want to read your books or whatever information you have online, because this is all very useful, not only to me, but some of my friends that are grappling with some of these issues. Now, I probably mention God more than anyone else in my life. That doesn't mean that if I don't believe in the credo of the agnostic or the atheist. I don't think it's necessary. For me, it was, but I think whoever said, be kind, be kind, be kind, covers a lot. It doesn't mean just being nice. With kind, there's some wisdom and some thoughtfulness that goes into that. And Mozart is for everybody. My hero was Leonard Bernstein. He was conducting classical music. And when he said the Beatles were great in 1965, people went berserk because that was dirty. So let's get away from segregating our musical choices. It takes a while to marinate yourself in classical music. Don't listen to Beethoven's Fifth once and say, I don't get it. I didn't get it either. It takes 7 hearings. Put it on while you're multitasking. And then after 7 hearings, let's say, sit down, doing nothing else, and listen to it. And I guarantee if you haven't made some kind of bridge to classical music, that will do it for you.
He's doing what he wants to do. There we go. Appreciate it once again and everything. Great conversation. I do have to tease you, Ms. Castro, and everything, because I've been wanting to know this ever since I reached out to you on the internet. And I know that I said that was the last question, but because I know that I am guilty, I mentioned it earlier, and I do get the munchies. And yes, I will go get my peanuts and everything along those lines. So what did the munchies come up into your title? Because when I saw the title, and I'm going like, maybe she's got like a side business with munchies or something like that. But I was going, where did the munchies come up in this nature of your business? Because I was going like, I have to ask her that before we get off the air, because I know that I'm guilty of going out and eating peanuts and cookies and other things that would be considered munchie.
Well, I'm guilty of that kind of munchie as well. I'm absolutely a foodie and all of that. But yeah, the inspiration behind Michaela's Mind Munchies was the idea of enjoying these little tidbits in regards to, mental things. So thinking about topics of spirituality or mental health. That's where the name came from. And also the MMM. Michaela's Mind Munchies. There we go. And now,
well said. Thank you. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. Absolutely. As well.
Well, no problem. Like I said, I'm going to bounce off with these commercials so y'all can head out. And this is a couple of PSAs, including some around health and maybe even one around food and financial wealth and everything. But I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. And like I said, I think it's been the second time, Maestro Curry, so we'll have to get you back for a third or fourth. And definitely I hope to get you back as well, Ms. Curry, Ms. Castro. So look forward to having you back on as well.
That would be great. It's been such a pleasure.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Yeah. Cool. Ready to play the commercial? There we go.
It's time for Bible or Babble. Gather round for your new favorite show. If you little work, show 'em what you know. Let's go. Bible or Babble. It's Bible. Let's go. Calling every saint, we gon' put you to the test. See who know that B.I.B. a little bitch. Bible or Babble. It's Bible. Let's go.
Are you looking for money-saving strategies for your business and personal finances? Are you tired of working hard every day with little or nothing to show for it? Contact Prosperity Financial Services, LLC right now for your free financial consultation. Call now to reserve yours today. 804-349-8600. 804-349-8600.
How you holding up? Nothing wrong with getting help.
If I promise to look into it, will you drop it and help me build this fence?
Now you need my help.
If you or a veteran you know needs support, don't wait. Reach out. Find resources at va.gov/reach.
Hi, my name is Maria Jones, baker and owner of Very Vegan, a premier mobile bakery specializing in putting a plant-based spin on some of your favorite desserts. Inspired by my own personal experience with my journey with healthier eating habits, I was determined to make comparable items with desirable textures and great taste. We're always experimenting with different flavor profiles and expanding our menu. I enjoy my creative license as well as imparting ideas and requests from my customers. It makes for new and exciting items. Some of our customer faves are the specialty cheesecakes such as the banana pudding with homemade vegan vanilla wafers, strawberry crunch, honey bun, fruity pebbles, peach cobbler, and many others. We also offer moist, rich cupcakes, delectable cookies, decadent brownies, and scrumptious pound cake. Discover how amazingly delicious vegan can be. I am available for orders, or you can purchase my items exclusively at the Black Farmers Hub.